You want to kick it off or you want me to?
Yeah, I can try kicking it off.
Who did the last one?
I think I attempted to, and then I just kept screwing it up. And then you did.
You should try it this time.
All right. We'll see how I do.
This is Whiskey Wanderlust.
And we're on an expedition to discover how Colorado is elevating craft spirits from grain to glass.
We bring whiskey explorers like you an inside look at the distilled stories, colorful characters, and rich flavors that make Colorado a true whiskey frontier.
So, pour yourself a dram
And join us on an unforgettable journey.
on this episode, Talnua Distillery.
Welcome to Whiskey Wanderlust. My name's Ryan.
And I'm Corey.
And we are continuing our journey through the Colorado whiskey landscape. And today we're talking to Talnua Distillery out of Arvada, Colorado.
Yeah. And this is episode 5, which is a little hard to believe.
Yeah.
We've already released 4 and 5. I mean, for those that are weekly and monthly podcasters, hitting 5 episodes is kind of a big deal. So
yeah, and it's been a ton of work, but it's also been a ton of fun. And so
Absolutely.
we appreciate all the feedback we've been getting. Everybody tuning in, subscribing. If you're not subscribed yet, please do so. We have, just a bunch of extra content coming out that you don't want to miss, both on YouTube and through the podcast feed, wherever we're getting the podcast at.
So real quick, if this is your first time joining us, we've had a number of really cool episodes already, but we've interviewed Boulder Spirits, 291, right here in Colorado Springs. We've done Law's Distillery.
And Bear Creek.
And this last week, we had the privilege of launching kind of a bootleg interview with Outlaws from Law's Distillery. That was cool. So if you not check that out, go back and do that as well. But yes, please subscribe, follow us on socials. It's really help us out. And in fact, this next month, keep your eyes peeled and your fingers ready for a swag announcement. We're going to encourage you guys to like and subscribe to our show, and we're going to be tossing out some cool T-shirts at you guys. Yeah. This is one of them.
Yeah,
you'll get your choice whether you want this one or the dark blue one. But
yeah, I'm not wearing a Whiskey Wanderlust shirt today because it's springtime in the Rockies, yeah. And baseball's in full swing. Spring training's going on right now, so I have to represent.
I'm a Giants fan, and so I couldn't bring myself to wear a Rockies jersey. So, but I figured I'd keep it Colorado, to keep it with whiskey.
Not me. I'm going all in Colorado. So
yeah,
the whiskey, the teams.
The Rockies are my second favorite team in the division. So,
all right.
Yeah, that's good, right?
As long as it's not the Dodgers.
No, the Dodgers, Boo Dodgers. That's where we go with that, right? I mean, and we could talk baseball for a while, but anyways, this is also our first episode featuring our new Whiskey Wanderlust Wisdom glasses. These are gifted to us by the one and only Matt Hondorf. And in fact, if you guys, if you're a distillery or just maybe a club owner or whatever, and you guys want some customized Wisdom whiskey glasses, hit us up we'll refer you over to Matt Hondorf there where he can get those for you as well.
Yeah, they're awesome. Like I much prefer these over Glencairns because they're super cool.
Yeah, and they're not going to knock over, and they got a nice heavy base and stuff to them, and they got kind of a sleek, modern look to them. I think they're really really slick. So, yeah. Now Matt if you've been paying attention to the show or followed us on socials, Matt has been instrumental to us getting started, which has been fantastic, and we owe him a lot already. But he's got something new in the works.
Yeah, him and a friend. I can't remember his name. Dang it. I wish I knew. Sorry, but Matt, he's got a new podcast out called Stewards of Stoke.
Stewards of Stoke, yep.
Yep. And
they just launched their first episode this last week.
Yeah, so go over in your podcast feed and check them out, Stewards of Stoke. They're talking about just getting outdoors, taking care of the outdoors, and I think they're visiting different breweries across Colorado too as they're recording these episodes.
And it's everything from like mountain biking to skiing, snowboarding, and they're hoping to get some cool outdoor influencers on the show.
Yeah,
I think they even give a shout out to Alex Arnold if he's listening to go ahead and hey, and Jimmy Chin, if you're listening here, please, we'd love to have you on the show. I don't know if you like whiskey or not, but we'd love to have you on here anyway. So
yeah, that'd be great.
Circling back to today's episode, we're interviewing the one and only Talnua, which is the name stems from Gaelic for new land, and Meagan and Patrick Miller up in Arvada have put together a very unique spirit offering right here from Colorado, which is it's fantastic, and we're super excited to share it with you. But before we get too far, their big anniversary event that they have every year, they celebrate with St. Paddy's Day appropriately, because their focus is on Irish style, and they're self-regulated by the Irish style whiskey standards, which is just a really cool thing. So we're releasing this episode a little bit earlier than we may have before, strictly because their celebration is in, from the time this episode launched, will be about a week and a half. So on March 15th is their big annual...
March 14th and 15th.
Excuse me, 14th and 15th.
1 p.m. to 9 p.m.
There you go.
Go check them out.
Yeah, so if you guys are up in the Arvada area and you want to check out a really cool party, they have a special release that they do every year. It's called Old Saints Keep, which we get into in the episode. It's super cool. And this is last year's release, which we got from them, and it is a fantastic spirit. And we had privilege of tasting some of the components of on this particular episode. So that was pretty cool.
This next one, I mean, this one's good. This is the 2024 release.
Yes.
The 2025 it was fantastic.
Yes.
Like just the small component. And so
yeah. And so if you guys are fans of Irish style whiskey, I think you guys would be I think you guys would take to Talnua's products very, very easily. And it's really easy to fall in love with Patrick and Meagan, right? They're just fantastic.
Just a great couple. They love animals. They love whiskey. What's not to love about them, right?
We met their dog Millie. Millie was running around at the oh my gosh,
around their offices.
Barrel room with us.
Yeah.
Around the rack house with us. That's what I was looking for.
Yeah.
And anyways, Millie was a great little pup, and we enjoyed meeting her. But so what stuck out to you in the episode?
I think, like you mentioned, that they're sticking to the Irish whiskey. What's it called? The technical file, I think is what Megan described it as, and that they're doing it self-imposed. So they're not Irish style American whiskey. They're American single pot whiskey, but they are holding to the tradition of the Irish style. And so that's like really cool that they're kind of putting these limits on themselves. And I think, like for me personally, I like to think that when you impose limits on yourself, that gives you kind of this really like area of freedom to be creative within those limits.
Exactly.
And so they're doing some like really incredible stuff.
Yeah. So they're right, and that falls into the single pot still right category, and how they're doing that. It comes down to the unmalted grain that they're using. Right now, they're not using Irish grain; they are using American grain, and they're also using American water, and they're distilling it here in Colorado. So it is very much is as much Irish as it is Colorado in many ways, because of how they're regulating the style and how they produce it, but they are certainly still using that terroir approach to producing a very unique Colorado spirit. So that for us is very, very cool. And then, I mean, their story of how they got into it is fascinating too, right? They both started out oil and gas, right? Yeah. Patrick was a field trained chemist for an oil company, and then Megan calls herself the landlocked mermaid, right? She was on the regulatory side, and so kind of a 1-2 punch, right? Got a chemist and a regulations, like perfect for whiskey, right? Because it's both, right? So, and their story about how they were inspired at the Rugby World Cup, right?
Yeah, in 2011, the September 11th, 2011 anniversary, which we talked about in the episode too.
Yeah, and that was just super cool. So their origin story is very unique and tells a lot about why they chose Irish, the Irish brand or the Irish style. So super cool.
And then the other thing too is in the time of recording this episode, in between then and now, they have won the World Whiskey Award for 2025 for Best Pot Still, American Pot Still,
which is
Single Pot Still.
Which is I mean, there's a lot of brands that are winning these awards out of Colorado, but in particular, it's cool to see ones that we've been talking to and interviewing stuff that they're winning as well. So in that mix this year was Laws as well, and some others. So
Bowler Spirits was up there.
Yeah, that's true. Yeah. Yep. So it's very cool to see this stuff coming through. So
Colorado's making some waves in the whiskey world. So it's pretty really cool to see. Yeah.
Well, another thing that was interesting about we've now gone through several different distilleries, right? And we've seen a mix of fermentation approaches, right? 291 uses the open fermentation, right? They got the big fermentation casks there, and they're they leave it to the open germination stuff. Law is the same thing. Yeah. Right. Talnua doesn't, and that's partially the regulations that they're working with. But it was fascinating for us to kind of see that in action because they were actually fermenting over there and seeing that process stuff come through. So we got some cool shots on the tour for that. So be looking out for the tour asset as well. Again, that's exclusively uploaded on YouTube. Be sure to like and follow us there as well. You'll have the full video podcast and the tour there available, 2 different assets there. But yeah, anything else?
No, that's it. So I say let's get into this discussion. So
cheers, man.
Cheers.
Welcome to Whiskey Wanderlust. We're here in Arvada at Talnua Distillery with Meagan and Patrick Miller here, and we're gonna have some fun talking about a little Irish history and how they got into the business. So anyways, welcome guys.
Yeah, thank you guys. Thank you so much for having us, and welcome to Talnua.
Yeah, beautiful space you guys have here.
Thank you.
So,
thank you.
Yeah.
Well, I mean, we could geek out about branding, but maybe we'll save that for later. Right? You guys have done a lot there. But so you guys have quite a story to tell about your background. I'll let you guys kind of pick up where you guys want to start. But Patrick, why don't you tell us how the origins of this place and your background here?
I mean, I think the best place to start is always at our honeymoon. It was 9/11/2011, an easy date to remember because it was the 10-year anniversary of 9/11. We were at a pub in Galway called Unpuckin. And
how do you say that?
Unpuckin is the name.
Okay.
Great pub in Ireland. It was actually kind of catty corner from our hotel that we were staying at, and the Rugby World Cup was on during our honeymoon. And that day, Ireland was playing the United States.
Oh man!
And so we were the only ones with Team USA gear on in the pub because it was like 8 or 9 a.m. In Ireland because the game was actually being played in New Zealand.
Oh right.
And so we were doing the morning watch. And Ireland, unfortunately, beat our USA Eagles. Ireland's very good at rugby. And so, we were just sharing jolts and jams with everybody at the
What's there drinking
bar.
going on at this place?
Well, you're not legally allowed to serve alcohol in Ireland before like 10 a.m. So we were kind of drinking whiskey out of
coffee mugs, kind of.
Okay.
I mean, it's the
Irish
rugby,
coffee, right?
it's the rugby,
That's-
it's the
I
rugby
think you're out
World
of the
Cup,
statute
right?
of
Straight
limitations on
way.
that.
Yeah, it's the Rugby World Cup. There's some forgiveness
Yeah.
there. But it was just this amazing time. It was such a fun morning. In walks, and this is a Friday, right? So in walks the first cases of Redbreast 12-year-old cask strength that had been re-released to the market for ages, right? I mean, Single Pot Still whiskey, we'll talk about it, kind of get more into the origin story of the style of whiskey. But as far as our origin story goes, we were there on a magical morning in which this style of whiskey, Single Pot Still, was reintroduced to the Irish market, right? Not to the world, but just to the Irish. And it makes sense if you know the whiskey business, right? September, October, November, December, Sandy, that's your big selling month. So Redbreast hits the shelves and immediately the bartender rips open a case and is like, you guys have to try this. This is like a huge deal for us. Starts pouring it out and is telling us this crazy story about what the style is, what happened to it, why it's being re-released. And if you've ever had Redbreast 12-year-old, it's a fantastic whiskey,
great.
right?
Absolutely, yeah.
It's one of those whiskeys that I think you could hand to any whiskey drinker, bourbon, Scotch, peated whiskey fans, name it, and they know it's of high quality and it just is really tasty.
I bet he offered me. Here's Redbreast 12. Okay, thank you. Yes.
Always, absolutely.
I
Right?
ate some
That's
this week,
exactly.
so.
It's huge.
I mean, it wins international awards every year.
Yeah.
That's good.
And year after year. I mean, it's not a one-trick pony for sure.
Right.
And so it has just been this. We fell in love with it, right? And we were in Ireland. It's a beautiful whiskey, and then of course, going back year after year, new brands would start coming out. You had the Powers line, John's Lane, Three Swallows, Redbreast 15, and then the older expressions, 21, 27 started coming out. You had the spot lines, green spot, now there's red, yellow, blue, gold.
Yeah.
And then craft
all good too.
emerging markets. Yes, absolutely. And all those that those are all Middleton, right?
Yeah.
That's all made where
Okay.
Jameson's made, right? So all those brands
Yeah.
were kind of the revival brands that Middleton was re-releasing under this Single Pot Still umbrella.
Yeah.
And then of course you had Glendalough come out and Teeling and you start to name a bunch of the craft folks who started making these. It was just we were coming back like mules, suitcases full of whiskey.
Did you have to go buy new suitcases because you had already?
Surprisingly, only just in May did we buy a bottle suitcase.
Our first bottle suitcase, because we were going to Ireland and we were going to Whiskey Live, and it was like we're taking 12 bottles over, right? So they're built for wine, because wine bottles are much more like uniform in shape. Typically, whiskey bottles are all kinds of shape, whatever.
And so this is like a foam molded.
It's like a foam mold.
That's cool.
Like a Pelican case.
Kind of, yep. But it's like
I can send you the link.
We'll send you a link. It's a good. Everyone needs one.
Well, I'm thinking,
take the Colorado whiskey on the road.
We should run a contest for the podcast where we get a bunch of people flying to Colorado and then they can visit all the distilleries on the tour.
Yeah, get those.
They get a free case to take home all the whiskey with them.
It's brilliant.
I love that. Plug the Colorado Spirits Trail.
Yeah,
exactly.
For sure.
Yes,
Colorado
absolutely.
Spirits Trail.
There you go.
So for us, this origin story, we became these like de facto ambassadors because you have to remember this timeline, right? This is 2011, so not ancient history, right? You couldn't get
some of us.
you couldn't get any of those products that I mentioned before 2014 in the United States. It didn't land out here until Christmas of 2015. So we're not even talking 10 years ago that this whiskey was reintroduced from the most ancient distilling tradition in Ireland.
Right.
We're talking about a very modern era here. And so as we kept coming back home, we were like brand ambassadors. I mean, check out all these new whiskeys, have tastings for our friends. And we had always just been in love with whiskey. And so we were both in oil and gas. I was at a company called Newfield Exploration. Their headquarters is in the Woodlands, Texas, outside of Houston. And Meagan was working for Bayswater Exploration, whose headquarters is here. Well, in 2014, oil went from like $110 a barrel to $40 a barrel in like 6 months, right? And my company decided that they were going to close all their U.S. Land offices. And Denver was their largest office. And we were like, one of us is going to be looking for a job, so they were like, you have a job, but it's now in Houston. And so it was like, well, one of us is going to be looking for a job, and Colorado is home. So
But you guys are both originally from Houston area, right?
Yes.
I am.
You
Yeah,
are.
I'm
She is,
a
yeah.
rare native Houstonian.
Okay.
So all of my family is still there.
Okay.
So it was just one of these. We had lived in Colorado for a long time, and it was this decision where there was a little bit of us, I think, that was kind of like, maybe we should be in different industries, right? So that especially one as volatile potentially as oil and gas, it was like, this should be something. It's an opportunity because we had this crazy little idea, right? That was like, nobody's making this. Nobody even knows about it yet. I mean, 2014, 2015, the amount of people who knew about single pot still whiskey was zero, right? I mean, if you knew about it, you were the one telling everybody. And so there was this, man, we live in the state of which barley is the heritage grain, like out west between Colorado, Wyoming, Montana, Idaho, and the Dakotas. 80+% of the nation's barley is made in those states. And so it is a Rocky Mountain grain, right? German immigrants brought from the foothills of the Alps to the foothills of the Rockies here, right? And it was like, I mean, the brewing culture. Our water is fantastic. We have this grain, and there was this kind of like, I mean, should we do it? And turns out, Meagan got an email couple months before my office was closing. And it was for the Breckenridge Distilling Practical Distillery Startup course that they used to put on. And it's basically a week-long crash course of everything you need to know to open up a distillery. The master distiller up there, Jordan Vaya, great man. He's gone on to do multiple other projects like Heaven's Door, even with Bob Dylan.
Wow.
And so this class popped up, and I was like, I mean, it's kind of like an adult summer camp to go up to Breckenridge and like make
Yeah.
whiskey for a week.
Play in the mountains.
And I'm like emailing on my oil field.
I would call him and be like, "Hey, how was your day?" And he's like, "I gotta go. I'm hanging out with the guys at the pub or whatever, learning how to make whiskey."
Yeah.
Like,
Yeah, it's
"Oh,
very
okay,
Stuck at
well,
home in the office.
I was on the computer
How was your
all
day?
day.
Okay, all right, I'll see you later.
It's very important business happening.
Yeah.
Remember, this was my idea.
But it was really great. It was truly a crash course. I mean, it was everything from how you pay your taxes and how you structure your workflows and build out your equipment and actually run stills and mash in and all that.
The business side of things, and
It was both.
Okay.
It wasn't just here's some recipes to tinker with. It was a full on course.
Okay.
And it was really great. And it was like, oh man, I love this, right? However, there was a bit of me that was like, I still think I just love drinking it. And I really want to make sure that we're not like, that I really do love it. I need to work in it before we kind of dedicate.
You don't want to be, start a business plan and just become an advanced hobbyist, right?
Exactly. Absolutely. Right. And thank
true.
God we knew that now, because we'll talk about it. There was a heavy level of naivete getting into a business like this, and just the structure and enormity of running a factory, more or less, right, is not a normal kind of business startup thing, right? And so I actually was able to get a job at Stranahan's. They had just had some recent turnover. I emailed them and on like a Thursday, and I was in for an interview on Monday, and they were like, "When can you start?" and so it was great because Stranahan's is single malt, of course. So great for us, where single pot still is all barley and single malt is all barley. We'll talk about how they're different in that nature, but it was a great learning experience for those 3 years that I was there. Almost like going to graduate school a little bit, hands-on, learning how to troubleshoot all the things, right? Mashing, fermentation, distillation, what happens when your chiller goes down, how do you operate a boiler, clean. That's the name of the game. And so it was just a really great time that really prepared us for the commercial side, while we, of course, are totally legally making whiskey at the house as we're developing our recipe. I mean,
Statutory limitations.
we pay plenty of taxes. They'll be fine. But we.
And
Mostly.
quick note on that.
Please.
The spirits, I learned recently that makes about 85% of the excise taxes in the state. Like, the spirits world is paying plenty of taxes there, so I don't think
for
we
sure
worry about that.
For sure. I mean, the layers of taxation is a whole other podcast we should do at some point.
Let's do it.
But yeah, it was this beautiful time, wonderful crew. We still love all of our Strana fam, we call them. And there was this moment where I was at the brewer's desk. I was actually covering for a buddy who was not able to be there that day. He's actually now our production manager. But
what's his name?
Kevin Hines. And so I was sitting at the brewer's desk, and Katie Sue, one of the tour guides, came out and was like, "Hey, there's somebody here who wants to, ask about selling some equipment or something like that." Well, turns out that man's name is Robert Segrist. He's one of the 4 partners at the distillery. Me, Megan, Robert, and my cousin Amy, 4 founders. Wow. And Robert had this distillery that had gone out of business in the building over that we'll go see. The original space, 5,000 square feet. It had a chiller, a boiler, a forklift, a handmade still, old dairy tanks that they were using for fermenters. And it was like, well, Stranahan's isn't going to buy any of this. Is way too small for that scale for what their operation is. Yeah. And I was like, well, I'd love to come see this after shift. So we met up here. And I was telling them about this, everything we're talking about. Like, here's the story. We've been making this at the house. Obviously I'm a distiller at Stranahan's, all of that. And so it was just this beautiful time that we didn't have money pulled together. We didn't have a plan at all. And his family was actually gracious enough to give us a year of free rent. And we went
Holy
to
smokes.
business school together to write our business plan.
The two of you guys, or
all three of us.
okay,
Yeah.
Amy included? In that?
Amy lives in Indy, actually.
She wasn't actually getting paid at the time.
Yeah. I mean, none of us
It was a hobby
get
still for
paid.
her.
Yeah, I was going to say, it's still
familial
mostly a
favor,
hobby
right?
for us.
Yeah.
We know a little bit about that.
Yeah. But
Nice.
it was just this great moment that we were able to really build a team together. And we got the keys to the building in 2017, did about 6 months of build out, started making whiskey in 2018, January of 2018, and we opened to the public on St. Patrick's Day of 2019, and then we closed to the public on St. Patrick's Day of 2020 with the COVID wave.
Yeah.
We always are.
Another podcast.
Another podcast. Yeah, it's COVID era with whiskey distillers. That
And
would
did you
be a
guys
good
make
one.
hand sanitizer too?
We did. We
Okay.
did for this for
One
the city.
batch.
One batch that was contracted through the city of Arvada for hospital fire.
Did you-
So we
Did you
didn't
put your logo on it at all?
We did.
we did
Cool,
because
that's
you
awesome.
have to. It still follows all the Tax and Trade Bureau regulations. Like
Yeah.
you have to have where it's manufactured. You have to. Yeah.
Interesting.
So it's.
Wow,
I mean, it's
okay.
it's controlled just like. I mean, Purell is controlled just like.
I guess it makes sense, right? It just
Yeah.
those are not necessarily things.
There's
you
not
think about.
normal
You don't
things.
want to
Yeah.
drink it.
Yeah.
And I mean, this stuff is like field hospital grade, right? I mean, it's like really high alcohol. This isn't we all know, we all had a batch of it at some point on our hands. It's real runny and, very different than the kind of nicer versions that
With
are
the gel stuff.
commercially
Yeah,
available.
yeah.
I'm just glad that is over.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I
That
never
was-
want to make hand sanitizer.
Yeah,
Yes,
that's-
absolutely. I think
Yeah.
we're all glad that's
Yeah, totally.
Leave
Yeah.
that to the professionals.
Yeah, exactly. But yeah, it was a crazy time. But yeah, that kind of brings us up to our kind of birth into the whiskey making world and making this style. And really, I think the biggest thing that we're doing here and why we're so in love with it and why it's so special is it's reviving an ancient tradition that is our family's heritage and our family's legacy.
Yeah.
That bringing this style of whiskey back to the world. No other American distillery makes this and focuses on this style. And so it's a really beautiful thing to have the ability to be a torchbearer of, especially it's 2025, right? I mean, we've been making whiskey for 1,000 years and to be at this point and be able to be a standard bearer of this ancient tradition is really special for us.
Well, so we've talked about regulation, and as I understand, your background was on the regulatory side of oil and gas, correct?
Yeah.
And then you kind of, with your job, you kind of grew into the chemistry stuff because of the oil and gas stuff.
Mhm.
But you mix chemistry and regulations, like perfect match.
There you go. Yep.
So
Yep.
I mean, he's talked about, but you were all on board on this the whole time, right?
Yeah. Well, welcome back to your own podcast. I told you.
No, dude.
You got the time.
Let her
for
roll.
40
it.
minutes.
Yeah.
No way. No, absolutely not.
Yeah. So I was. I'll keep it quick.
No,
I'm pretty good. at it.
No, we want to hear. Give us the details.
So I have a master's in marine resource management. So I've been a landlocked mermaid here in Colorado for 13 years, going on 14 years.
And when you first told me that,
Yeah.
my initial thought was, wow, marine oil and gas, like how's it? But there is a solid connection there, especially with like the offshore drilling stuff, right?
Sure.
Okay.
That wasn't my really connection, but I guess it was a part of my connection through the company that we worked through, who we met through. I undergrad ocean and coastal resources. Freshman year, after that, I had an internship at MI Swaco in Houston, which was an old drilling fluids company. It's now Schlumberger, one of the biggest companies in the world. And so that's where we met. So he was in the chemistry lab. I was in the greenhouse lab. And so after my summer of that internship, they told me that they wanted to hire me, but I had to graduate in 3 years. And I was like, I don't know about that. And I really like being at the beach every day. I'm thinking like the 5-year
Mermaids
plan.
coming out.
Yeah.
But then so it's like in the movies, you got the yellow legal pad, and my boss wrote down something.
Slid it across the
Literally,
table.
I'm not kidding you. This is, and I looked at it and I was like, All
I can
right,
do that.
I can do that. Yeah. Sure, I'll see you.
Your
I'll
time on
see
the
you.
beach is going to come after the 3 years.
Yeah.
When do I start?
Yeah.
So through that, I was working part-time for them for the next 2.5 years, like 20 hours a week. And I was also able to cater all of my classes towards what I knew my job was going to be, which was environmental science and regulatory and facility management, like environmental policy kind of stuff. So that boded really well. And then they actually paid for part of my graduate school to get my master's, knowing, well, they really wanted me to get my PhD, but that didn't happen because a job opened up for me in Denver doing U.S. land regulatory.
I'm a CSU grad, so I was like, we're going back to the Rockies.
So that's kind of what the connection was. And, I think I mentioned this is just one big chemistry set for him. And this is just one big regulatory liability for me. And so we kind of make a good team. And with Amy being her history in digital design and artwork and creative, being our creative director is amazing. And
she's website, bottle labels. When you're asking who does your labels, we do everything in house here.
Oh,
right?
so she's
all of our
great
logo
on that.
design,
That's great.
everything that's been made
She's
has
done a
come
great
out
job,
of
Yeah,
us.
for sure.
Yeah, and
Branding's
then
fantastic.
not to forget Robert and bring him back up, but he's also a general contractor and a commercial real estate agent. And so
Check.
Yeah.
Exactly.
It's
like
dream team.
huge. It
Yeah.
is. It really is a dream team. I can't imagine not having those pieces because, I think it's safe to say that there's a lot of garbage water out there with good marketing and it
Garbage water.
It sells. It sells a ton, right?
We had a friend the other day
that
talk about
look
it.
and feel is so important, and then having a guy that can execute build outs and permits and all that. Because like I said, I don't love to use the word factory so much, though I've said it twice now. But it is an industrial facility, and it comes with all those regulations as well. Yeah. And building all that out and having someone who could execute that is huge.
It's manufacturing, it's factories. So,
it is.
Yeah.
It is.
Were you saying you had a guy the other day?
Oh, how do you describe it?
I can't remember.
Basically, bottled toilet water was kind of what. And
yeah, there you go.
It's it's brown and everything. So
It's brown and everything.
Just drink it real
now
fast.
Now I don't even.
Now
I don't even want this.
Yeah, add enough alcohol to it. It kills everything.
Just kidding. I pulled it back.
Yeah.
So now you guys obviously love Colorado, right? And you kind of given us a little bit of a history, and you kind of touched on the barley and stuff. But, kind of back us up a little ways to why did bourbon start so far east, and why are we now seeing kind of resurgence of things like American single malt and even your Irish style stuff here? Tell us more about the history of that, how we kind of find ourselves in this current state of terroir, if you will.
I love this question, and I think there are two important
5 minutes.
histories. I got it. Okay, but the Eastern Seaboard, because one of the logical questions is, how are you guys the first Irish Americans building this type of distillery, making this style of whiskey with the millions of Irish and Scotch Irish that are moved here?
So far away from where they made landfall.
Very far away, right?
Yeah.
And it's part of just the agricultural history and landscape of the United States. When they landed, like our good friends at Leopold Brothers make a Maryland rye, right? You get Monongahela rye from Pennsylvania. That's rye country, right? So all in that New England area, a lot of rye whiskey culture. And then, of course, corn has been such a huge part of the American story, the American landscape, from crops, food availability. The Irish, for the first time, when they made a batch of whiskey and had extra grain, or I should say made food, had their own grain that they owned. The king didn't own it. That they were able to make their own batches of whiskey. And it became really popular, especially when you're talking 1800s. The cash economy was fairly fluid, right? Goods and services were traded as much or more than a cash exchange and transaction. And so all of our Irish American ancestors, now local is cool. It was the only option in 1840, right? And so everybody was making corn, rye, wheat-based whiskey. Barley and the strains available at the time didn't grow east of the Mississippi. And so you have this agricultural landscape with this distilling know-how that paired to build the bourbon legacy that has become the mainstay heritage of American whiskey making. And so it wasn't until those German immigrants came over from the foothills of the Alps to the foothills of the Rockies, started planting grassland grains that grow out here, hardier grains that don't require nearly as much water. Corn is a pretty water-heavy area, right?
Yeah.
Also, and grows in a region where there's a lot of rainfall annually. Different out here, we get snowfall, not nearly as much rainfall, right? And so dryland grass strains grow out here much better. And so barley became the crop of the Rocky Mountains. It's also great cattle feed as well. Hardy, you got a nice bit of protein in it as well. And so, as we're talking about reviving this legacy, the craft movement is hardly ancient, right? I mean, the tradition of whiskey making is, but the craft movement, 15, 20 years old, really. I mean, Stranahan's just had their 20th anniversary.
Yeah.
And they were one of the OG pioneers. And so, that was really the beginning of this legacy. So most of the whiskey makers, they're all in Kentucky. I mean, we can Google this, look this up for sure, but I think it's still like 95% of all the bourbon is made in Kentucky, although there's a couple thousand U.S. distillers, and most of those aren't in the state. The volume of whiskey that the big folks produce, like we're at Willett in this past February, a year ago, and in one of their rack houses, and they have small rack houses that are only 20,000 barrels. I was like, there are more barrels in this one rack house than there are in the entire state of Colorado. And you walk out to it overlooks Heaven Hill. Okay. And they have 70,000 barrel rack houses, just Heaven Hill, right? And it's just like the scale here is a totally different, it's totally different, right? And so it's just this really cool thing that, like anything craft, anything handmade, it's slower, it's hands-on. Although we are a manufacturing facility, it's much more tactile for us, barrel to barrel. We make 16 barrels a week. And so
we'll get 20,000 eventually.
Yeah, we're getting there.
Thanks.
At this time, so it's just noon. Buffalo Trace has made more barrels today than Talnua will this entire year.
Wow.
Right? I mean, we're in just a very different situation.
That's crazy.
But I think it's something beautiful about the craft movement. And so, it answers that question. It's like, why are you guys the first ones? It was like, well, this whiskey didn't reappear until 2011. Stranahan's was already 10 years old almost, right? And so the Irish bringing this back to market, and us having our honeymoon and being on this track of a turbulent oil and gas economy at the time, and just our timeliness in the market has led us to hopefully continue to be the standard bearer for this style of whiskey.
And I think when craft distillers are making something, they want to be passionate about it, right? And you two are obviously very passionate about, Irish single pot still whiskey, because you were bringing suitcases of it back. And so just talk about a little bit about that passion and how it's going into the barrels.
When we first had our first sips of that cast strength Redbreast 12-year-old, we fell in love with it and was like, the world needs to know about this. And we have also watched our brethren do the American single malt movement over the last 10 to 20 years. And we saw a vision that perhaps we could do the same thing. Single pot still is not recognized. American single pot still is not recognized by the TTB as a category. And so we would love to follow in American single malt footsteps in order to create a category for single pot still.
Hopefully it won't take you 50 years either.
I know. And I mean, the speed that the government moves oftentimes though, and some of it is if we ask them to do that, they're like, we're not going to change regulations for this venture, right? It needs to be a movement.
Exactly.
And so
part of that is So we follow the Irish Whiskey Technical File for Single Pot Still.
And you're self-regulated on that, right?
Yeah,
Okay.
we self-regulate by the Irish Whiskey Technical File for everything that we can possibly follow. We're not going to import Irish water here, and because we want to use our great El Dorado water that we have here,
Absolutely.
El Dorado Springs water that we have here, and we can't age in Ireland, right? So
Sure.
there are things that we obviously have to separate, that we are American single pot still whiskey. We're not trying to be Irish single pot still or anything. We are specifically trying to be American single pot still whiskey using our grains here and our water here, and then our aging environment.
Climate. Yeah.
And you said the word terroir is really that beautiful French word for a sense of place and the taste of something. And we're at about as different climatically as you can get. There's 6 to 8 inches of snow out here that you guys braved braved up here to get here today.
I've all that. It's all good.
And that this kind of this beautiful smell, that smell of burning cash as whiskey leaves your barrels is part of that flavor, part of the nature, really giving us a huge angel share, 7 to 11%, depending on stave thickness of the casks here. Ireland and Scotland, 2% a year, right? And so the exchange of all of the tannins, lignins, acid profiles that are then esterifying with the higher volume of air to catalyze these reactions gives you a very different product. And so for us, I think people always ask like, oh, does it change the speed? Does it age faster? And it's faster is not really the word for it. It is different.
As
but
Boulder puts it, it ages differently.
Differently.
And I think that's a good way to describe it, right? Because there are so many different variables. You can't say it's faster.
Totally. Yeah.
And Ryan Negley would say, there's not different esters forming at a faster rate here. It's not possible, right?
Totally. Yeah.
And I mean, you could probably speak to more. I'm marketing. I'm not a chemist, so
Sure.
you got more information on that than I'll ever know.
And you're exactly. I mean, same thing when we started out with 15-gallon barrels, right? So when we opened on St. Patty's Day, we had 15-month-old whiskey in a 15-gallon barrel, right? It doesn't age faster, but you do get more oak in the product faster, right? So it's kind of the same thing. It's different. It gives you different compounds, like the whiskey tasted different. Ours was a race to get to 53-gallon plus size cask. So I think there's a beautiful balance there. But it also needs 3, 4, 5, 6 years, right? Even here at altitude. I think we have found in something this year that we're really excited about is that we're hitting our bottled and bond era, where all of our product lines are moving towards bottled and bond, starting with our American White Oak Char No. 2, and then our cask and stave will, and then our peated will, and then our sherry will, and it'll all be bottled and bond. And it's fun because we were the very first distillery in the United States to have a bottled and bond single pot still. Right, so forever we'll be known as the first single pot still that was bottled and bond here. So it's just part of this heritage building, like bringing this Irish tradition into the American whiskey making world.
So, I mean, it sounds like you guys are really like Irish missionaries, right? So tell me more about as almost a pioneer back over to this, even though the early Irish pioneers are already long come and gone, right? Tell us more about like what that means to you.
I mean, well, he's the one that's Irish. I'm kind of Welsh Scottish, but Gaelic. Honestly,
there's Viking in there, I'm sure, somewhere.
Well, mentality wise,
absolutely.
So Colorado is actually home to Leadville. Colorado was one of the largest Irish populations of immigrants at the time. They were miners, and so there's also a really cool Irish Colorado connection here. And I think there's some insane percentage of people who identify as Irish descent in America. And fun fact, did you know that corned beef and cabbage is not a thing in Ireland? That is an American-made thing, just like bourbon was an American-made thing by the Gaels who came over because they were using what resources they had at the time, which was corned beef. And so that became like this Irish-American staple.
Interesting.
Yeah. And another cool story in Denver, there are the San Patricios. So when the Irish immigrated here to Denver specifically, the Mexicans actually brought them in because there were other immigrants, won't name nations, that were not as welcoming to the Irish as other people were, specifically the Mexicans. And so they brought them in. And so there's the San Patricios that are Mexican-Irish people. And we thought that was a really cool history statement.
As Catholics, they bonded together. And of course, in the St. Patrick, the St. Patricios are.
I was going to say there's a connection there.
Exactly.
Well, it doesn't sound too different from how the Irish were treated in other areas of the United States, right? As I understand, the Northeast, a lot of them came over as bonded slaves and stuff like that. So, which is really cool. I'm Irish, and I've traced my roots to 2 towns in Ireland, which is super cool. I've not been there yet, but I'd like to make it.
You get there, absolutely.
I believe I have a little bit of Irish in me because I'm a Hull.
Oh,
so
yeah.
I'm Irish and then I'm Hispanic, so maybe I'm
San Patricio.
Right here.
Gosh.
Dude, we need to. That's your new nickname, San Patricio.
I love it.
That's awesome.
It's just this. It's a beautiful cultural tie, right? And I think that's one of the things that when you're talking about what immigrants have done in the United States is, I think we used to consider America a melting pot. And I've heard that it's actually better described as a salad bowl, where together it's one, but immigrant communities have strong ties, strong regionalities at times, and cultural elements that really personify who they are throughout time and history. And so it's been this amazing thing, I think, for us to carry this Gaelic tradition here. We always say that, Talnua is the American spirit with an Irish soul. And so it has this tie to that Irish heritage.
Well, so as I understand, Talnua is Gaelic for new land, correct? So you guys are really, it's not only in the whiskey.
It's in the name.
It's in the name and everything.
Yeah.
And by the way, I love your branding too. And I would love to have a conversation with Amy about her work there. It's
totally
fantastic.
Yeah, thanks.
But
one thing I want to circle back on though, so being the regulatory expert in-house, you had mentioned that you're self-regulating to meet these Irish standards. Is there any sort of effort like there was for the American Single Malt Commission to? Is there any sort of commission or official efforts to categorize that?
Thanks for bringing that back up because what I did want to touch on that is that single pot still whiskey is happening all over the world. So no, there is no commission per se. Like American Single Malt, and I think we're about 10 years behind them. But it is happening all over the world. There are a couple Australian single pot still whiskeys, one Canadian one best whiskey of the world a few years ago, a Tasmanian one, and now a Japanese single pot still whiskey. So it's happening all over the world, and we're just like seeing these little pockets of this upbringing, and we're super excited. And that's not to say there are one-offs and some people who do it like seasonally or throughout the United States as well. I don't know to what extent they are across the world and across America are following the technical file. I can't speak to that, but that's we try to be the standard of the quality that Ireland has created in using those regulations. So we just hope that other people will follow suit, and we encourage other people to make a single pot still whiskey in the right way. And the Irish have also told us is like, well, as long as you're doing it right, that's the first time we went to Ireland to tell them exactly. First time we went to Ireland, we met with Bernard Walsh from Walsh Whiskey Writers Tears.
Irishman.
And so we met with him, and for some reason, he's a talker. You know this already. And for some reason, he wasn't speaking up in this meeting. And so I ended up saying, well, we want to make an American single pot still whiskey using American grains and water resources. And he paused for a minute, and I'm like kind of worried about Patrick. I'm looking over at him like, why aren't you saying anything? And then Bernard speaks up and he goes, well, And if I had a good Irish accent, I would use it now, but I don't. He goes, well, if you're going to make a single pot still, you better make it good because it sticks with you. And I was like, okay. And then you could see the sigh of relief with Patrick.
Yeah. It was, I think, for us, it was so important to be accepted. Quite frankly, I mean, we don't need to beat around the bush about it. It was like, it would have been heartbreaking if they were like, get out of here, don't do that. Yeah. We hate this idea, right? And to have that validation from such a powerhouse of an individual.
Yeah, for sure.
And like Meagan mentioned, it is not an easy style of whiskey to make. Any kind of raw barley mashing, which I'll tell you guys, we'll go in what single pot still is and what regulations we really adhere to, right? Mm-hmm. But it was just this huge sigh of relief, I think, for us to get to go into this new era with a small blessing, if anything, and
an Irish blessing.
Yes, exactly. Yes.
We joke that like 7 years later, we think more people know about us in Ireland than they do in Colorado.
Yeah. Because
seriously.
So have you taken your product back and shared it with people and stuff there? And what's their response been?
Yeah, we have, and other people have.
Mm-hmm. We're in bars in Ireland that we have never personally distributed anything to, so people have brought it back. And Irish rules and regulations are very different as far as you can just hand a bartender a legal bottle of whiskey and they can sell it. Very different than a 3-tier system here and all the regulatory landscape that we deal with. So
your liabilities, you called it.
Liabilities.
So we self-distribute through our people.
Well, okay, tell you what, when I'm going to Ireland, I'll bring my new tote.
And
I'll take a case back with me and we'll share it with.
Absolutely.
That's
great. Yeah. I'll just take 10%. Is that cool?
10%. That's a pretty good distribution, right?
But you can't sell it to them. You have to give it to them. So 10%
you just take
of nothing
10% out of the bottle.
10% out of the
Just
bottle.
like you're making whiskey illegally in your basement, right?
Yeah, totally.
Okay. Understand. Got it. Fight Club. We don't talk about that. Okay. So we talked about barley. We kind of we'd love for you to talk about the regulations too, but we've talked to a lot of people here in the state, right? And even Alistair, he's Scottish, right? He's coming to, and he's kind of the same thing you guys are, but he's kind of going with the American single malt version of that.
Yeah.
And
very proud of them, by the way.
Yeah, and
we love
them. A great product, right? And then we've talked to Root Shoot about their projects, stuff there, like the malting and all that stuff, right? And you guys aren't using malty stuff, right? You guys are using unmalted, right?
Both malted and unmalted.
Are you using both? Okay.
Our unmalted is from Root Shoot, though.
Okay. Yeah. So but it seems to be a growing movement, right? And now with the legalization of American single malt, I think that probably gives some more credence potentially to the single pot still movement as well, right? Because it's a new era, right? But Colorado as a state, right? We grow rye really well, we grow barley really well. There's this new sense of terroir coming in, right? You guys are doing your best version of Irish style here. And it's really cool to see that. But talk to me about what you guys see as a vision of terroir and Colorado whiskey as a general, not necessarily single pot still, and what you guys see as the future of that. And we'll love any insights to the terroir side of that, as like the movement stuff you're seeing there to help us understand that.
We are doing a project with a distillery in Ireland called Boan, where we laid down the exact same recipe, the same triple distillation, the same ex-bourbon barrels, and in a few more years, we'll do side-by-side packs where we'll sell.
So you guys did it on the same date?
Same date.
Right? You barreled them on the
same date. Everything. Yeah. Yep.
That's fun.
And it was great because it was like, usually distilleries are not attempting to make the same recipe, right? And so it was really fun to have a recipe, to execute it together, barrel it together, and then in a few short years, bottle it.
So whose idea was it?
Actually, a gentleman named Matt Healy of potstill.com. He is does an amazing work.
Renaissance man in whiskey.
I was going to say, I was trying to think of like, what do you even call him? I mean, he's worked for distilleries, for distributors. He's got a podcast. He's great. He actually flew over here and we did an interview in 2019. And so it's just a really great guy. At the time he was with Boan and had this idea like, hey, what if we put this together and really showcase like how different climate regions are when talking about whiskey and aging whiskey, right? Because everybody gives voice to it. I mean, when you're in Kentucky, they talk about the temperature swings and the limestone water, and I mean, it's a real thing, and it really does set whiskey apart. And obviously is huge in wine, where you have these grapes and vines that came over from Cabernet to Southern California, and bam. Totally different product, recognizable, but distinguishable in that same way.
Better that one year too.
And
I was born in Napa, so
were you really?
I'm California wine all the way, like
yep, for sure.
And I was born in southern New Mexico, and so I'm like a hatch green chili.
Yeah,
Pueblo,
see, it's
sorry, Pueblo, but
totally. And I just think it's part of that. And I think what Colorado is doing is showing that, improving that on multiple different levels, right? It's happening in bourbon and rye whiskeys and different wheat whiskeys and heirloom grains from the state. And I think the Colorado whiskey movement is exciting because it's taking all of that. And if there's a style of whiskey being made, it's being made here and showcasing that terroir.
Yeah, and I have to say, I'm super proud of all of my Colorado brothers and sisters who are making whiskey. Colorado whiskey has made a name for itself across the United States and around the world. And so,
absolutely.
And I've understood that there's been arguments about terroir isn't it's not necessarily a thing, but when you were talking about the history of bourbon comes from Kentucky because they had corn and American single malt and the Irish pot still whiskey that you're making here with barley is really Colorado specific. And I was reading I think you're acquainted with him, Colin Spolman from
from Kings County. Absolutely, he's fantastic.
And he was talking about how he was
brilliant.
Empire Rye.
Empire Rye.
And just so I think just that regionality of just using what's there kind of puts that argument to rest.
Totally.
I agree with you.
And most of the major regions of spirits, Scotland, Scotch. Irish whiskey, and Irish separated themselves from Scotland. They want to be different, right? They want to spell it different, right?
Yep.
And here we are in the United States, in Kentucky, decided, Lake Clamo, we're the de facto masters of whiskey in the United States.
Yeah.
And, I've heard numerous accounts of people going to Kentucky to the Bourbon Trail and getting some pitch from some marketing guy and on a factory floor saying, a distillery floor, they're saying, oh yeah, you can't make bourbon outside of Kentucky. It's well, that's not true.
Yeah.
And so, I think we're starting to kind of see some of that separation that Ireland, fell away from Scotland, right? And I think we're starting to see that in the individual states here in the United States.
Yeah.
And I think that's kind of cool.
It is really cool.
Each state's starting to make a name for themselves in different ways. California obviously have rich topography, right? They can almost do any type you want. Washington's very different. New York's very different, right?
Totally.
And Texas even, so, and here we are in Colorado, high country, good water, right? But even to the barrels, we talked about it earlier, they age differently. Yeah. So we can make a very distinct flavor and brand of whiskey here.
Totally.
It's totally different. I think the terroir thing is going to be here to stay. I think it's going to be follow the suit of wine.
And it's fun to be the ones figuring it out. What barrels work best? Yeah. What different char levels? Is it a new cask? Is it finished? Is it, all of those act differently. And so it's fun to be on the pioneering side of what is the state's kind of method? Is there one, right? It goes back to some types of whiskey have regulations that bourbon has to be in a charred new American oak barrel, right? Single pot still whiskey just has to be in a wood container. It doesn't have to be in any type of oak. It can be chestnut or cherry or very different wood species, right? So it'll be fun to really get to explore that here at Altitude.
Yeah. So for the record, for the regulatory side, we fall under just the regular American whiskey category based off of everything that we do. So it's not regulated as a single pot still whiskey, but it is regulated as the American whiskey category, and so everything we do falls under that.
I was going to say, and Irish whiskey, it's much more strict, and so it falls nice and tidily into the American landscape. And so, you know,
So you got margin to play with in there.
Oh yeah,
for sure.
a lot.
Yeah. Do you guys want to talk about those regulations? Because it is about the style of whiskey, right? I mean, it kind of defines it much like bourbon. The biggest ones are you have to use a minimum of 30% malted barley and a minimum of 30% raw barley. You can use up to 5% oats, wheat, or rye if you want, but we're 50-50 malted, unmalted barley.
Okay.
So you can make up that ratio any way that you want as long as you don't drop below 30% of.
That's interesting that all the 5%.
Yes.
That's interesting.
It is a heritage thing. Depending on how long you want to talk about this, it is.
I get the sense you could talk about it for a
It is.
long time.
You guys
let me just
help
say,
you set up a podcast. Let's do this.
oh my God, please help him because he's. Let me just say that there is a man named Fnan O'Connor who has just gotten his, recently.
What was his name again?
Fnan O'Connor.
Okay.
He has a PhD in the history of Irish whiskey. He's the first person ever to get his PhD in history of Irish whiskey.
Wow.
And so he has spent many years of his life studying exactly what Patrick is trying to get down to, a little bit of information.
But you know, it's amazing because through this research, they really single pot still whiskey, Irish single pot still whiskey has a GI protection like champagne, and so now again we're American single pot still. So you can't put the word Irish on there, but much like single malt can be made in any other nation, right? However, part of the GI is that it has to have historical precedence. You can't just be like, hey, we want to do this, no one else can do it, it's protected, right? And it's like, it has to have a serious basis of history. Well, as they were uncovering, Fnan and others, this historical basis for this style of whiskey, by the time the regulation had gone through, they allowed up to 5%.
Okay.
Now they are going to allow 30% oats, wheat, or rye.
It's not official yet.
It's not official yet, but it is on the government's desk to put through. Not dissimilar
and another
to
8 years.
8 years. But that 30% has that historic precedence to it, right? I mean, we think now and we talk so much about whiskey as mash bills and it's part of the regulatory landscape. When you're talking Irish whiskey, they were inventing it. They were trying all kinds of stuff, right? Taxes came in, changed the use of malted barley because the Irish started throwing large portions of raw barley in as a means of tax evasion.
Interesting.
But they were using wheat at
crazy
times.
history behind that as well.
They were using oats at time. They were using, because it was an agrarian society and that product just followed the seasons. And so when you had a bottle of Jameson, it isn't like it is now where every single bottle is the same.
Right.
Different people made it, different people stored it and aged it, different people bottled it. And so it's just a very different landscape than we think of today.
Well, if anybody knows any Irish history, right, they also know potatoes have a particular history there. Did they ever use potatoes in their history during like those different times?
There's not a lot of history of potatoes being used in anything outside of what we know as poitín today.
That's what I was gonna say.
Poitín is like moonshine. And so
clear spirit type thing. Okay.
Yes. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, new make.
spirit.
Yeah.
New make.
So to follow up, just the first rule that he was saying that we follow is the 30-35. The second rule is a grain off fermentation and distillation. So we basically act exactly like a brewery up until the stills. Well, yeah, up until the stills. So we separate our wort from our grain. Our grain goes to either farmers or to compost. And then the third requirement is a copper distillation in
distillation
Thank you.
and copper pot stills. It's in the name.
Unobstructed copper pot stills.
Okay. Yep. You have to use that. You cannot use column stills, right? Ennius
hybrids.
Coffee invented the column still in 1831. It was patented. And he was an Irishman. Before that, it didn't have the name pot still because that was the only
Yeah, it was just a
apparatus.
still.
That was just a still is
Yeah.
exactly it. So the name came really from the big Dublin distillers. That a lot of these organizations were large urban facilities. We think a lot about quaint Irish ruralness, and the small stills, poitín, means little pot. Right, and so every farm had a still.
That's what you were
right,
making
there
in
was
your
a lot of
basement
illicit, yes, a lot of illicit distilling going on still in Ireland. However, really the big players were the big Dublin guys, right? And this is before electricity. These guys were making millions of gallons of whiskey a year, and so it was just this really. It was a shock, right? I mean, a new piece of equipment came in. It's much more efficient. The Dublin distillers called it silent spirit because of its neutrality at the time. Column stills today are very different than the very first apparatuses that came out, and so the Dublin distiller said, no, it has to be made in a pot still. This style of whiskey, to maintain its Irishness and its heritage, has to be made in a pot still, and that's how then it became referred to, right? Malted, unmalted barley, traditionally triple distilled, because when only double distilled, raw barley is very oily, very textural, and so a third distillation lightens that kind of underbelly to the whiskey, but also rounds off the sharp edges of new make, so you get this really beautifully balanced nuance.
Is that a Viking drum I just heard?
It was a bucket. It was just a drop bucket. Yeah.
I was like, they're coming for us.
Didn't know anybody was still here. So.
But really kind of part of that historical weave, and for us and for the Irish in general, it's not the best name because you get people like, we'll bring up Willett again, perfect example. Pot still bourbon, right? It absolutely, all they're telling you is that it's made in a pot still, and that's really different than most of it's made in a column still, right? Balcones has a pot still, but it's a bourbon, right? Woodford is a great example. Their stills that they use pot stills and their bourbon is, so it doesn't preclude you from using that in other styles of whiskey, right? But the name is
our references to the mash bill.
So in the single term in there, it's still similar to like single malt Scotch, right? Where
Exactly.
One distillery.
Grain to glass, exactly. That's exactly it.
Some of the words they use commonly, but then there's different meanings to some of them.
Yeah, I mean, I wish it was more like wine, where it was like estate produced or something that led you to understand, because there's so many singles, single barrel, single batch, single malt, single, whatever, and they can mean different things, right? And so when people hear single pot still, a lot of people think, oh, it's made in one single pot still, right? And it's like, you have 3 pot stills. It's like, yep, and then I have to give them a 2-hour history lesson about why it's called.
So you choose to go to it.
Welcome to the TED Talk. That's what we say.
It's 10 minutes. Would you make it?
Yes.
So you guys had described, and obviously, I guess we might cut this part out, but so as a big part of our efforts here, right, and because of our purpose-driven background stuff and how we met, stuff like that in the fostering world, we want to give an opportunity for you guys to highlight opportunities that you guys have had to give back to the community as well. And so we've done some really cool stuff, and we had an interview with Root Shoot, which took a little bit of a different twist, right, because they were recipients of that, which is kind of cool. I understand you guys had a little bit of little something to do with that, which is cool. But tell us about some of your philanthropic background stuff, and then segue that into the Acorn Project and what you guys are doing there, because that's super fascinating to us.
Yeah.
So I should kick that off.
Yeah. So sure. I think maybe the biggest portions of our donations started with Colorado Parks and Wildlife. It was their 125th anniversary, and their logo is not dissimilar to our logo, which is the ram, state animal of Colorado. And so they approached us, and actually we had to apply to be considered to even be
Yeah, they had their craft collaborations
Yeah,
that
they
they were
had
doing.
craft
Mhm.
collaborations, and
Mhm.
so we were like, well, we got to do this, and so we did that, and we raised $12,500 for them for 125th anniversary, doing a
Single barrel release.
But what was the finish on it?
It was the port finish from Balistreri.
There we go.
Yeah,
Okay.
Balistreri
so
Winery,
Balistreri
a
is
local
another-
winery here.
Yeah,
Mhm.
so another local.
Western Soap or
No, it's
no.
actually
Over here?
a local winery just east of here. Yeah.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, they're 70th and 25 or 70 and 25 ish. And so then that started that, and then the following year we had some unfortunate cancer on our dog, and we were at Wheat Ridge Animal Hospital and loved them so much, and they helped us out with their Lenny Fund, which is their support for cancer patients for their animals, and June was fortunate enough to be a candidate of that, and so
June
we
was the name of your
our
puppy.
puppy, yeah.
Okay.
Sorry, I just hit my microphone.
Okay.
And so we wanted to give back in a way, so we actually bottled a cask strength continuum cask whiskey, which people are clamoring for to come back, and we're able to raise $5,000 for them, and then I'll let you continue with the Acorn Project.
Yeah, the Acorn Project, we've always had this desire and philanthropic heart that we can make an impact beyond the glass. And the Acorn Project was born out of having a singular focus on what we wanted to do with our philanthropic efforts. And so it's recent. I just turned 40 in October. And so as part of my
Still older.
as part of my birthday, we did a
Like, what does that look for?
release. And that release was really focusing on natural resources and
Things
the first
that allow us to make whiskey.
right, all the things that affect it, right? I mean, there's so many water quality things. Again, we've just started this. Our first recipient was Root Shoot because they had hundreds of acres of hail damage that completely
Like
destroyed
600 acres.
yeah, it was not a
lot.
small amount, right? And so they do a lot of regenerative farming practices for the state, which is very rare, and they are part of that Colorado family legacy that is so important to the business
I think-
here.
I think, and I don't want to digress too far, but farmers like Root Shoot
Mhm.
play a pivotal role in that terroir movement, right? 'Cause
Big
they're,
time.
Absolutely.
They're growing that grain here.
Big
You
time.
guys, and as I understand, the quality of the grain has improved over the years because it's less focus on feed and beer,
Mhm.
and they're putting more of an emphasis on the quality that they need to put into distilled spirits. So
Totally.
that's
Yeah.
a huge.
It is.
They're
And-
playing a big linchpin in that. So
Yeah,
Definitely.
and it's one of those things, especially when you talk about agro business versus family businesses and family farms. That is something important, and it's a huge part of the climate, the region, the end product. And so for us, it was a special partnership because we've been working with them since we started. Their barley's been in our whiskey, and so the Acorn Project moving forward will really focus on those different objectives, and some of it is timely, right? I mean, that happened couple months before we released the special bottle release and announced to the world, like, this is our new philanthropic wing, the Acorn Project. So it's really a special thing, I think, for us to continue and really have a singular voice to you're asked a lot as a business to donate things and give back, and we very much want to, but I want it to be high impact. So when we're more focused with it, it allows us to be higher impact on a single thing rather than a more of a smattering. But I know Colorado spirits, you see them at every auction, right? There's a very generous heart in the industry.
The beautiful thing about it is that it's an ongoing project. It's a
Mhm.
standalone like foundation essentially.
Yep.
That you're continuing, and so it's not just a write in a check and
Exactly.
maybe a couple years from now you guys are going to do something else.
Yeah.
And so it's just and
we're even having as the year progresses and of course as it grows and develops, we're going to host like educational classes so that people can come in and learn about water quality things. Of course, we live in the most beautiful state. And
Absolutely.
so having this kind of wildlife woodland focus as well, I think is really great and interesting for people to come in. And, like Meagan said, having the Ram was very deliberate. We wanted to have the beautiful thing. I think in a lot of Irish and Scottish brands is there's a sense of place on the logo. Glenfiddich, Valley of the Deer, right? Glenlivet, bridge over the river, right? I mean, all of these things that really tie to that sense of place, like Tullamore Dew with the Irish Wolfhound on it, right? There's these things that we wanted to give a regionality to and let people know that it's Colorado, and the Bighorn Ram being a symbol of the broader Rockies, but the state animal of Colorado. And with the Acorn Project, I think really ties in this natural sense to the product.
It's funny. I mean, the elk is kind of, I think in folklore, right, is it's kind of the Colorado animal, but the ram is really like, yeah, it's cool.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. And so tell me about the name. Like, where did the name Acorn Project come from then?
Our tagline for it is planting seeds of change, right? And so the acorn being the birth of an oak, and having this thought that we can influence through little acts and projects a much bigger creature, a much bigger dream.
Right.
Yeah.
I really did try to come up with an acronym that it could be, but that was really
yeah.
But it's, I mean, and the way that oak affects the whiskey,
exactly.
It's the same.
Exactly.
And actually, on our tubes, we do have acorn seal. One of the seals is an acorn.
Oh.
To represent the oak. Yeah.
Yeah.
So it kind of fit. Yeah.
I mean, Colorado's not known for their oak trees, right? But
Sure.
there's
Yeah.
tie with the barrel.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Yeah. Totally.
We have a lot of oak around here, though.
Yeah, we do.
Yeah.
It just grows. Like, I don't know. I mean, they're sprouting up everywhere.
Just keep showing up.
Well, that's super cool. Well, guys, thank you for indulging us on that piece for our angel share. That's that's a big part of what we're doing out. Obviously, you can look at spirits a number of ways, right?
Sure.
But the one thing we want to focus on is how, because it didn't take us long to figure out a lot of you guys are doing good things for the community, and that makes us feel good, and it makes us want to support you guys even more and get your name out there. So
Thank you.
I appreciate that. I think most of us in this industry, very much most of us, are in this for the camaraderie and
the community. I mean, this is like
yeah.
the community binder, right? Is to gather around.
This is a vessel for communication and
Totally
openness and connection.
Yeah, totally agree.
Yeah.
Well, thank you guys. Welcome to the tasting segment here at Talnua, and Patrick here is going to be guiding us through a tasting of their heritage selection here. Tell us more about that.
Yeah, so Heritage Selection, I love this whiskey because it is a blend like many of the famous whiskeys that Ireland became known for, especially in the modern era. 60 to 65% of this whiskey is grain whiskey that we import from Ireland. The other 35 to 40% is our house-made pot still triple distilled, right? So pot still plus grain whiskey is what Jameson is. And so we thought it would be a really fun project and a fun product to have this real Irish American whiskey. So we've been making this since day one, this beautiful blend that, especially when people say, hey, I want an Irish whiskey, well, most people mean is a blend, because that's usually what people have had experience-wise. So it's a fun thing to have, like a recognizable product in our product line that really hits that notion of an Irish whiskey, right, outside of these more rich, robust pot still whiskeys that we'll work with here in a second. But yeah, lots of those bright, delicate notes that I think are just a perfect example of Irish style whiskeys.
Okay.
Also, sláinte.
Sláinte.
So what's your favorite part about this one?
It's just super light and easy drinking, and it goes well in any cocktail you want it to. Mostly, like, I like it in citrus forward cocktails, like a good whiskey sour. Love a good whiskey sour, and this is the go-to for me for a whiskey sour.
Well, definitely on the nose, it's got a lot more fruit notes than I think your other products I've nosed and tasted, right?
Totally.
Especially compared to the Old Saints Keep, and
Sure.
it's very sweet on the nose. I was like, that's
It
very
is,
pleasant.
yeah. And I love one thing that I think, and it's exciting when we talk about this year's Old Saints and how it registers, is when Megan and I fell in love with these Irish and Scottish whiskeys, outside of the heavily peated versions, is that there's just this beautiful balanced delicacy to the European brands. And we really love that, and a lot of American whiskey, it's very rough, rugged, bold, broad-shouldered, and I think that there's something very oaky. I think there's something really special to showcase about the distillate side, and a very well oak balance to a spirit. And I think we hit that with this. It's nice and bright and just an easy sipper. If we were to talk about this whiskey seasonally, it would be spring, summer. Right, this is very much a spring summer style.
This is a good wedding whiskey.
Totally,
Like,
totally, yeah.
So spring's coming right summertime, like
for sure.
It's gonna go further, right?
Yeah, big time. Yeah,
I mean, like the nose and even on the palate a little bit, it almost like a wine, like a grape forward. This is what I get. Yeah, so
totally.
With this podcast, we're going to change the tradition of weddings. Instead of champagne, they start drinking. Or just drinking whiskey.
Well,
and then they can reach out to you to supply.
We'll do it. Yeah,
It has made an appearance at many family whiskeys.
Family
weddings.
It is. It really is a nice, easy drinker. And one of the on St. Patrick's Day, our big celebration and anniversary party. This is a huge seller in ginger ale, squeeze a lime. Right, it's just a perfect, nice, easy cocktail for that kind of spring feel.
Because for those days, for all of us, really, for our own mental space, we need like easy cocktails to just get through.
Yeah, absolutely. That was very good. Wow. I don't recall tasting this when I was here at your last at the Old Saints Keep last year. At the release party.
Yeah. It's one of those core product lines that it's always been a staple for us, and so it's easy, especially when people are coming for an event where we have like a special release or something like that. It kind of plays the fiddle in the background a little bit at times.
And this is 86 proof as well. So
okay. And I think I've tried this. It was an older expression, but I think it was quarter cask peated finish. Is this the same that went into that one?
That was straight single pot still. Actually, what ended up, that became continuum cask. When we first started, it was just those little barrels that I mentioned, our quarter cask program. Well, eventually, I think we really listened to that whiskey, because as it started to get too much oak or more oak than we wanted from this balanced spirit profile that we strive for here at Talnua, we ended up getting our Solera vat called our Continuum casks. So originally the quarter cask was the staple. And then it was like, ooh, okay, now we're hitting 18 months or so, getting closer to 2 years. This needs another home. We want it out of these little barrels. And so the Solera vat and that continuum cask allowed us to put space into it. So that is actually forever what made up the base of this, plus the Irish whiskey, was that quarter cask. And then same thing, that was finished in peat, right? That was kind of the quarter cask was the workhorse in our first 2 years.
Well, so now you have, it's currently January, right? And in less than 60 days, you guys have your next
We're ready. We're ready.
There's just a lot of work to do.
When this comes out, I believe it's going to be a week.
Heck yeah.
So let me back up. In just a week. No.
I'll catch her out.
Yeah.
Are you ready? You are going to be releasing the 2024 Old Saints Keep, correct?
Yes.
And I understand you've got a little bit of a taster for us on that.
Yeah. So we used our thief here that our business partner made. This is one of the 3, which I think the handle broke off of. But we used our thief here to grab a barrel sample of what will be our Old Saints Keep. So I'll pour a little bit of that for everybody here.
Yeah.
Now,
So
as I understand, you guys blend multiple barrels.
Thank you.
Yeah.
For this particular release, so we're only tasting a component of the final release, correct?
exactly, right? So this is a single barrel pull of what will be at least 4 barrels that we will marry together. And it's also cask strength. And I didn't take a proof on it, but I would guesstimate we're somewhere between 114, 116. That's kind of the window, the sweet spot for our aging and our finishing. The special thing about this is our mash bill 50-50 malted unmalted barley, triple distilled. It was aged in just like our bourbon cask and stave. So in ex-bourbon barrels with French and American oak staves for a minimum of 3 years. It was then transferred into casks that have a very special heritage. They were built as sherry barrels. They aged sherry for 13 years. After the 13 years, a brandy was put in that was distilled in 1948 and finished for 20 years in these casks.
Oh,
so
wow.
they started out as sherry barrels that then had brandy in them. Brandy took in a lot of that sherry, but left a lot of this beautiful, delicate, fruity notes. And speaking of, not dissimilar from our heritage selection, most of our previous Old Saints were our kind of richest, our boldest expression. I think the beautiful thing about this is the soft fruit palate that it falls on. This grape brandy that aged in this sherry just has this wonderful balance. Plus, being aged in an ex-bourbon barrel first before it finished for 2 years in these brandy barrels really gives us delicate gem of a whiskey. I hope you guys find it.
Having acquired a bottle of your Old Saints Keep last year at the St. Patrick's Day event, and I went back and revisited that spirit just last week to make sure I was familiar with it. And it certainly has a little bit more of a briny mineral consistency to it that it's not off-putting at all. It's quite good. But this on the nose, I mean, I'm already smelling a lot more fruit and stuff in my
big time.
Yeah.
It's almost like, and I don't want to lead the tasting notes specifically, but I very much get like a cinnamon dusted pears, plums to it. So that spice from the pot still whiskey, rich oiliness and that texture really pops and I think gives a nice kind of cinnamon allspice note on a nice fruit layer.
I think under that too, I'm smelling like almost like a cherry and a like cherry almond, almost like with like
very much an almondy nature for sure. I definitely.
You know, it's funny we're joking about the wedding, but I mean, my first taste on that was like bam, like right into like a very winey flavor.
Yeah, and huge legs on it.
And that was, I mean, that took me back to California right there. That was
totally.
I don't know. Last year we tried to convince Patrick to release this as our Old Saints Keep, and he said no, it needed another year. And this is me on record admitting that you're right.
You hear it right here on this podcast. It's official.
Yeah. Oh, I'm nervous about
very
what's going to
good.
happen later. No, this is, I'm very happy with this. It's just really, we wanted to honor those casks as well. Like, it's very rare that you get X barrels that have held any spirit that was distilled in the 40s, right?
Yeah,
and so
such
it's
history.
just such a cool thing that we had access to these casks, and I think that we did the right thing by putting that ex bourbon barrel in, so that there wasn't a punchy oak to compete with those fruit notes because I wanted those fruit notes to really dance. And I mean, the smell of those brandy barrels, I mean, it smelled like sherried brandy, right? It had that bright, sweet note to it. And I wanted that to be the show.
And unlike a lot of other sherry cask finish that I've tasted, it doesn't have that really earthy, organic, like musty flavor.
Yeah.
It's very, it's got a lot of bright fruit notes on it with like, I'm equating it to like a nice bright white wine. You know, it's really nice. And I mean, I've had now numerous years, and I think this is again, I know this is not going to be the finished product.
It's getting better.
But this is really,
I'm excited.
Really good.
I'm excited about this. And I pulled it. I took a sip of it because we pulled this. We're very patient here. I will say that one of the fun parts of the job is always pulling casks, right? But we really let things go. Like, we're not pulling barrels before 2 years ever. And so I realized that, we wanted to do a sample here today. And I was like, I haven't tasted this. I don't know what we're gonna try. I was like, okay, I'm pretty excited now to share this with you guys. This is really our first real close to the finish line. We'll dump this barrel right at the end of February. We slow cut here. So we take 2 weeks to cut down from barrel to bottle. It's part of the finishing refining process to prevent what is known as saponification, where it can cause a soaping by shocking it with water, shocking spirit with water.
Scorching it.
And so you very slowly add water.
You know about this?
Oh, yeah.
Yeah,
you do it too fast.
It's fantastic, especially with our gin that we make here, because there's that oiliness from the citrus and the juniper. If you add water too fast, you get soaping in it, and it's very present. So we'll dump this just a couple weeks before St. Patrick's Day and bottle it the Friday before, so it'll be ready for that week.
And what do you proof it down to?
100 proof.
100 proof.
Yep.
Okay. And how many barrels will you be blending for this one?
This will be 4.
Okay.
This will be 4. We have 4 of those brandy.
And how many bottles will you make out of that?
So we filled those things up. It's been 2 years. Likely it'll be between 1,000 and 1,200 bottles, which will be our largest batch. They are hogshead size casks, so not 200-liter American standard barrels, a little bit bigger. So even with the thickness of the staves, I'm looking at them right here. Beautiful black painted casks. Yeah.
What you can't see on camera right now are some beautiful, and you should get some B-roll. Yeah. Some beautiful black casks over there. They're super cool.
And we'll make sure we get them on the tour.
And the staves are a lot thicker, like these that are in shot right now. The American standard stave is much thinner than the wine-based casks made out of Europe, and so it's fun for us. We haven't had this type of cask in before. Obviously, these are very rare, very unique casks, and so right now I don't know what type, but I think comfortably 1,000 bottles for sure, which is always kind of our goal, just from any special release.
Is this a distillery only release, so you can only get bottle bottles here? Okay, so you hear it here. If you want a bottle of this, you got to come in and taste it and buy a bottle here. So please come down.
March 14th and 15th is our 6th anniversary party. And so we will be releasing this year's Old Saints Keep.
And are you going to have music again like you did last year?
Live music. We have a mobile cigar truck that comes out. And so there'll be cigars, live music, food, a bunch of different cocktails. It's always a really good time.
So St. Patrick's Day this year, 15th and 14th, 15th, excuse me. So it's not quite to St. Patrick's Day, but we'll get there because that's 17th, right? But we were here last year and it was fantastic. And hopefully this year it doesn't snow on you guys, because I understand there's a little history with that.
Every year.
Every other year it seems like.
Well, maybe, I don't know, maybe every time you break it out it snows. Maybe you guys are doing something with it.
It's snowing right now. That's true.
The crazy thing is 2020 was absolutely gorgeous. And
it's either a bluebird day or
2
feet of snow.
And COVID. Right?
Very Colorado time of year, that's for sure.
Well, I mean, last year it was cold and it snowed previously, but last year it's cold, and I think but there was still you had a lively bunch here. Still,
it was.
Able to meet your twin, right? That was
that's right.
Shout out to Allie.
I think there's a case of what's that movie?
Freaky Friday.
Everyone say it, the Parent Trap, right? Where
Parent
Trap.
Trap.
Yeah.
Parent Trap.
Parent
there you
Trap.
go.
Oh, Freaky Friday is like,
Yeah,
that's
Trap.
total different.
Oh,
That's
Lindsay
child
Lohan.
and parent switch.
So for those of you who don't know, Megan has a doppelganger who she's best friends with. And she could pitch to me
It's
or anybody
wild.
else that
Yeah.
they're twins, and you
would not.
you'd be a
know.
fool
It's
to
a-
not believe her. Like
Yeah.
it's crazy.
Yeah.
And anyway, so that was fun.
So one thing that we didn't talk about in our main interview, you guys recently received some recognition at the San Francisco whiskey.
Yeah, last year was
Competition,
a big deal for us. We won a World Whiskey Award, actually for this Old Saints for 2024's Old
Which
Saints.
is a good expression.
Thank you.
Very good.
And then same at double gold at San Francisco, and we're in the top 5 craft whiskeys in the United States. So yeah, it was a huge deal for us. It was really exciting. Those things just putting us on the map little by little. And that was actually for our bourbon cask and stave. So the base of this whiskey is what won at San Francisco.
Very cool.
Huge. Yeah, thanks for bringing that up.
Yeah,
I really appreciate it. Yeah.
Yeah. It's I guess on us that we didn't talk about that in the interview. But
Hey.
hey, we got it here, right?
We're still rolling. We're
Yeah,
still
yeah.
rolling,
Yeah.
guys.
Well, guys, this has been a great tasting, and I am very much looking forward to this latest release, the Old Saints Keep. And if you're in Denver, March 14th and 15th, please come down to Talnua in Arvada. Colorado. So, unless you're in the Springs, right? That's different, right? Anyways, come down and check out their party. They'll have it going. And buy yourself a bottle. This is going to be very good. So I look forward to it very much. So
Thank you.
cheers, guys.
Well, Sláinte,
Sláinte to
guys,
both of
again.
you.
Thank you so much for being here.
Sláinte to all of you.
Sláinte to all of
Thank
you.
That's very good. I am very
I'm real happy
looking
with
forward to
this. Yeah, I'm really
Yes.
happy with this.
Man, that's so good.
Thank you for joining us on Whiskey Wanderlust. Subscribe to the show on YouTube, Apple Podcasts, Spotify, Amazon Music, and all other major podcast platforms. And be sure to leave us a rating and review. Follow us on social media and visit us online at whiskeywanderlust.co.